You mentioned another thing I want to touch on camera performances.
Sure.
Talk about what it takes to make a great on-camera performance and what the structure of the game is.
Planning. It's all planning. If you read a script and someone says so-and-so sings along to the radio, you have to then prepare, which means that you're figuring out technical things. Is there an earwig on the actor?
And the earwig is?
Earwig is a little thing that you put inside the ear that basically you can't see, but you can have the song playing back. So you make sure that the actor is singing in key and in time to the song. Because what happens is if you have someone winging it, they're frequently out of key, because not many people are that good that they can be in key. So that's a major part. So you need to have a little thing, you have a playback person who's playing it back on set to make it work. Sometimes you have, for instance, a dance sequence. This happened a lot on Turn, which was an AMC series we worked on, where basically it was taking place in 1776, and we would have a harpsichord player and a whole group of dancers all dancing. And we had to figure out how each of these players, maybe it's harpsichord, and it's going to be, a harp, and there's going to be all these other elements.
Flutes? I would think they're big on flutes in the 1700s, right?
And we'd all have to have people like in time and in key and figure out, what was the music that was available that time period? What was in the colonies? How wealthy are these people? The music that was known by people who were wealthy, and most of the generals and the higher level military people were all from wealthy families. They would buy their position. So we knew that they had access to music that the common people wouldn't. Common people were frequently coming from Scottish or Irish backgrounds, where the English were usually from a wealthier background. So it was one of those tricky things. We had to research this like crazy. Then when it came to the on-camera performance, we had to figure out, all right, how many earwigs do we need? How do we do playback? Are we going to have someone play the piece ahead of time in the key that the composer will do later, or do we hire someone else? We had a guy named Tony Berg who did a fantastic job on the on-cameras. So he would build the music ahead of time. So we bring in a whole
team. As a music editor?
No, he was on board as our producer. So we would have him record these things ahead of time. So
he was a music producer.
Yeah. So I would find, okay, we're going to use a piece by Telemann. And that piece by Telemann is going to be played, in this case, on a string instruments. We need 3 string instruments. Each one of those players has to have an earwig, and we got to have them play it. It turns out harpsichord is tricky because the key is different. So we do it on a piano. So Tony would bring in a player that would play it on piano so they could all hear it, and then they would play according to that, and then we do a playback. So we might play back their instrument, we might play back the piano, depending on how it work on set. It gets complicated fast. And so the idea being that if you plan it out really well, you can get a lot of people to get really great things, or you can get like 40 people in a room dancing perfectly in time to something, and a singer singing along to it, even a lead vocal.
Right. And so you see how important that is, because if it's done incorrectly and it looks bad and someone's off, whether in the sync of the singing or dancing or any step, it takes you out of it right away.
Yep.
So the pre-records are one of the most important things. We have a friend named Matt Sullivan, right? Matt Sullivan has basically become the musical guy. Mm-hmm. He's single. He just goes, for a year on set, Beauty and the Beast, Chicago, whatever it is, and he just basically drills the actors. He's also a music producer. He's a musician himself, and he basically drills the actors and makes them learn how to sing along to these things. And it's, he's got his niche.
Yeah,
and it's a really fascinating process that he's gotten to. But the level of pre-records are super important in the game. And the Sun Records show we hired a guy just to be on set to do nothing but pre-records, because it's a musical show. And so you have to have that level of, some help, like a Tony or our guys. So to be able to do this, because we can't be in all these places at one time. You try to be on set for every on camera, but if they're shooting on location, it's very hard to do.
And studios don't have budgets, so they're not going to fly you out.
Right.
So the problem then is you got to find somebody local who can handle it. You have local choreographers, and you got to work with all these people and make sure it all works out.
Right.
So, and no one cares if it turns out, well, we didn't have enough budget for that. They just want to get it done.
That doesn't work.
So you have to make sure that you've done all the legwork, you've reached out to everybody you need to and got all the pieces in place, and that when it comes to the day of the shoot, you're either on your phone just waiting for an issue, or you're checking in through Skype, or you even have a laptop like this and you're following what's going on, so you can give direction from afar.
Right. So as you can see, there are so many different levels to the game of what you have to be good at, and how the communication has to be optimum, the follow through, the connections to be able to get the right producer and the right, lyricist, and put all these pieces together. I mean, you're the center of that wheel, and then all the spokes go around you. So it's really a fascinating thing to be able to do and master well. So questions from the crowd at this point, because we've been talking a lot. We need to hear you talk, Jonathan.
So do you ever feel like when you're selecting like licensed music that you're sort of in a way composing quote unquote this like for the show in that general? Because like I'm thinking of the closing scene of Breaking Bad with Badfinger's baby Blue, how like perfect that all fit. So do you sort of feel like that's part of your job in a way?
I mean, look, composing means you're creating something that's new. We're not. We're curating. We're trying to find things that feel natural and that fall in a way where you can't imagine that sequence without that. So really the job is ultimately a curatorial one, a storytelling one. And the end of any series, obviously if you can have a song, you have an opportunity for a song, there's a lot of attention that goes on that, and it's really important to get the tone right. I feel lucky. I've been on a few shows now that got to get the tone right at the close, but you can also miss that. And I think that it's hard. It's always hard. It's always challenging. But in many ways, our job is to have such a breadth of understanding of the characters at that point that, in a way, when you get to that answer, you just know it's right. When you get there. And that particular song, by the way, it was a song that Vince Gilligan chose. And what was interesting was we had earlier, when we first started doing Blue Meth, when we first introduced Blue Meth as a character, on a lark, we put together a mixtape of songs that had blue in them that we thought could be interesting. One of the ones that was Crystal Blue Persuasion, which ended up being in a montage later. And I felt really guilty about this, so I even kind of said to Vince, like, I hope we're never this literal, but here's a bunch of ideas that kind of play with this in case you want to be playful at some point. And I thought we'd all laugh about it and that would be the end of it. Well, as it turns out, that was one of the places that it got pulled from, and he selected that, and I didn't get it. I didn't understand why that choice when I first read the script. And it was only when I saw the shot, when I finally got the scene and I looked at it, and I placed the song up against it, and it all made sense to me. That the reason Vince pulled that song was that it was a love song. And it was a love song about making Breaking Bad, about us working together, about Walter White and crystal meth and science. And it was an angle that I would not have thought of on my own, or it was not an angle that I had explored at the time. And it was one of those things, and that's the magic of the job too, is sometimes the best ideas come from you long ago, or they come from somebody else. And in a way, we're kind of collectively, we're blamed for things that we're not responsible for, and we get credit for things that we're not responsible for. The truth is, we're team players. We're all working with everybody else, and we're there to help usher in a vision. And if that vision is clear, the right idea falls into place, regardless of where it got pulled from.
Right. And you brought up something that's really interesting, and that's the concept of being on the nose, right? Being too literal, right? You have a song, it's about love, and there's love in the lyrics. You have a song about blue crystal meth, and there's blue in the lyrics. And supervisors as a whole run from it for the most part, because they want to. It's viewed in a way as the easy way,
or
right?
tacky.
Or tacky. It's so you'll find the comedies will put on silly songs that fit the silly scenes, right? But in a way, as you get older, you realize, okay, whatever, you're there to serve. It's a service business. So you give your ideas, and you may try to be a little more arty in your fabric of it, but at the end of the day, it's entertainment. Mm-hmm. So they may want something that's smack dab on the middle of the nose. So when you guys sent me the songs for the Ben Stiller, Ben's executive producing movie, my friend's directing, and there's a beautiful montage of Gene Triplehorn and Donnell Logue. And I had them, showed them the scenes with the grizzly bear temp, and then another temp, which we ended up, Plastic Hotels, moving to the back of the movie, and so the scene's open right now. Mm-hmm. So they're working on sending me some stuff, and
they're doing your work for you, basically.
Well, kind of, but the bottom line is, it's wanted to be an interactive class,
right.
And the stuff that I think is solid, I send to Donnie and say, what do you think? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of an unrequited. It's the happiest moment in the film, actually.
Right.
So it's a question of how love oriented, and she's having an affair with this guy, and she's into it, and then at the end of the scene, she's got to go back to her crazy ass husband and life. So it's interesting to see that, and there is no right answer. The only right answer is at the end of the day what the director picks.
And taste, like sometimes I've definitely been in the room where, my silence becomes sort of like my vote,
Thomas is cringing in the corner as they
It
go for the
totally.
most mainstream approach possible.
And so like they'll kind of look over at me
Thomas,
like,
what do you think?
I've learned that in a weird way, sometimes you have more power by not talking. If you're used to always sort of alphaing things, sometimes it helps to not talk.
Right.
And then suddenly everyone's in the room, they're going like, and they look at you and they say, what do you think? And you're like, and
Do
they're
you
like,
really wanna know
okay.
what I think? Right.
Yeah, and then you share what you think. And then you haven't actively poisoned a well. You just basically pointed out what some of the limitations are.
Right.
And then you can be very fair about it. You can say, look, this might be a satisfying moment. This might be a moment that you don't need the audience to work too hard and to kind of enjoy that it is kind of up the middle and it's delivering exactly what you hope for.
Right.
But maybe there's a better angle where you can give it a little bit more nuance. I mean, the tricky thing for us is we tend to knock out more stuff that's weirdly on the nose or just lands too perfectly than we keep them in. Like, one of the problems I think for our team is we tend to outthink ourselves. And there are definitely moments when you're like, you know what? Sometimes
let it
vanilla
go.
ice cream is really good. Like,
Right.
you don't need to add anything. You know?
But what we talked about in the first class, remember about nuance, right? About you go in these rooms, and if you say too much or the wrong thing, you're blasted out, and you never see it coming, and you're not hired anymore. But the being judicious in your conversation with people of power that you're dealing with is super important for you guys to understand how to do, and it's not something you're going to pick up right away. But these classes are what this is for, and you try to take these little things in your head and you figure out how to nuance and what you need to say and when you need to say it, because
Yeah.
it is that kind of.
You got to read the room,
Gotta read the room.
You got to
It's a
read the
great
room.
point.
And in a way, when you're reading the room, you're learning about, the politics of the room. You're learning about the sensibilities of the room. And the key thing which I find is that anytime you can steer the conversation towards character, in a way that trumps everything, because everybody has an opinion about music and everybody has their own personal taste.
Or Harlan Goodman's great line, apparently, a guy used to run Paramount Pictures, was everybody has two jobs at the studio, and one of them is music.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And that's sort of the problem with it, because you're dealing with everybody who has a preconceived notion about what they think the right idea is. If you're able to steer the conversation towards character and towards story, what you're able to do, it's a little bit like two divorced parents. They're talking about each of what they want, and you kind of bring up like, what does a kid want? And every time you steer the conversation back to the kid, you're kind of in the right direction, and that can help to change the dynamic a little bit. But you got to figure out how to do that gently, because if you do it in a way where someone feels shamed, or they feel like you've made them feel embarrassed, or you've made them feel bad about something, you've created an unnecessary negative energy, when the truth is you're just trying to find the best thing for everybody.
Sure.
So I think that nuance is really important, and you got to figure out how to read that. It doesn't mean that you have to be political or play politics. It just means you have to be aware of it, so you know how gently to tread, and when you can actually take the room and say, I got some ideas here, and I just want to run them by you, and let's see how we feel. Because a lot of people are really looking for someone to come in there and say, tell us what you think works. But you want to make sure that you get permission, and that's a permission that sometimes goes away.
Yeah. So big week for you. First of all, big month. He was named president of the Guild of Music Supervisor, as voted on by the board. So congratulations on
Thank
that.
you.
And that's an organization that you guys know we've talked about. It started 8 years ago, and now we just got Emmy voting as part of a lobbying effort that a lot of hard work went into. So talk about your experience being nominated for an Emmy and going to the technical Emmys the other night.
I mean, it all happened really quickly is the weird part. Like, as you know, John, we had approached the TV Academy a while ago to just become members, because music supervisors were not members. We were kind of like...
You were shut out.
We were shut out. We had no voting rights. We were literally kind of like, as if we were, I don't know, craft services had a greater, seat at the table than we did. No offense to craft services, those of you who are going to end up practicing that wonderful job. But basically, we had a meeting with the TV Academy, with the music branch, and we pretty much just try to articulate why we do have a contribution and why we can be allies for them. And a lot of it is older composers. Many of them are composers who haven't worked in a while, and so I think that many of them had bad experiences with supervisors. They either had supervisors who, injected themselves in the process and made their job harder, or were maybe dubious and weren't necessarily the most professional people in the world. Who knows? But there was
I
a
think
lot
a
of
lot of it
negatives.
also, when I would be in a room with a composer, I used to look at it when I was younger. I would look at it like, okay, I want my songs to be in this spot
Right.
because this is a great spot for music. But the composer would be like, no, 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 I see this kind of theme here. So in a way, you are competing for territory in the same movie. So that's kind of how we, sometimes we would go awry with composers because you were competing. And by the way, also, you were actually taking money out of their pocket. Because if they put a score piece in that movie, TV show, that piece pays residuals down the road. Where the song, unless we wrote it, which we're not putting our own songs in the movie, you don't, so we're taking bread out of their pocket. In a way.
Absolutely.
And so there was always that light competitive edge. But then now it's a more collaborative field, and literally a guy had to die, and a couple of our guys who supported us had to come into the TV Academy, and boom, we were in. And
By the
we
way,
had-
for clarification, that person was not killed. They died of natural causes.
No, we're not that devious. We're not that devious. But anyway, so we got voting rights, and obviously last year, and then this year we got a category.
Yeah.
And so that category was
Outstanding
we all,
music
we all,
supervision.
yeah, we all talked about what your the nominees were, and you guys all researched them. And I sent some of the articles, the Washington Post article, the Variety Hollywood Reporter article. So they all kind of were familiar with it. So talk about what you experienced in the last couple of weeks leading up to it with the press, and the different level of being nominated for something big versus nothing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's an incredible honor to be nominated, and it's one of those things that you can never go into any of these things with the assumption it's going to happen. We all hope that we get a chance to work on great projects, and sometimes we go long stretches, as I mentioned earlier, that you don't, and there are shows that I work on that I love, but they're not going to get nominated for things. Like I love working on Love, the Judd Apatow series, but it's not material that is up for Emmys. Like it just is one of those shows that they don't take it seriously that way.
Even though Judd's a super high profile guy.
Absolutely, and maybe it should, but it's part of it. Just that's the way it is. Also, like Better Call Saul does not have huge audience numbers. I mean, compared to like The Walking Dead, another show I worked on, you can't even compare the two. It's like on two different levels, So you never quite know which project is going to be heralded as being great. You hope that your show is recognized. Like we submitted *Halt and Catch Fire*, which I think is a masterpiece of a show, but honestly nobody's paying attention to it. There's no press on it, and so it kind of gets overlooked. So in a weird way there is a little bit of a randomness to it. I did a lot of press on it, but not so much about the show, really more about the category and about the guild, and I think that one of the things that's been exciting for us in the community is that we didn't know this was going to happen. It happened kind of quickly. Like we went from suddenly being nobodies to being members of the music branch to suddenly having a category, and then to add the nomination, which was really exciting too. And it's like having Lost on Sunday was really not that big a deal because all of it happened so quickly and was so wonderful that really you just get to feel happy for Sue Jacobs, who won for Big Little Lies, and recognize that all of us have little moments that you get these things. And if you need it too badly to win, or you're too upset when you lose, it's a really hard game. And like I got nominated for Grammys a couple times, and that was really exciting. But I lost to like the Funk Brothers. The benefit, though, in the bigger way, and this is sort of the macro view, I think that having this nomination, this category, does mean that for certain supervisors, you're able to basically demand either a higher rate, or you can demand a single card credit, or you can do different things that hopefully change the way that studios view what we do. Because one of the problems that we have is we're still fighting for legitimacy. We're still fighting a lot of those people, like those composers, who feel like we're charlatans or we're bullshit artists, and we have iPods and therefore we have this job title. And I think that the truth is that as hopefully we've articulated, and as John's classes been doing weekly, is that the job is really challenging. It's really hard. There's a lot to it, and it's a lot of different skill sets that kind of have to all align well, and luck has to align too, because there's plenty of our colleagues who are incredibly talented who just haven't found a break. They've been stuck on projects that don't go anywhere or don't get the attention they might deserve. And it doesn't mean that the job isn't hard. Some jobs are really hard because the clearances are hard. Some of them are hard because you've got filmmakers calling you at midnight every single night to talk music, and just trying to put your kids to sleep, but you can't because the guy is talking and he really needs to get this off of his chest, and that can be part of the job too. So in a weird way, and I think the Guild has been great about this, is that it's really allowed us all as a community to see how everybody contributes in a different way. Everybody has a different angle. Everybody has a different contribution. And what's nice about the Emmy is that it allows us to take a few of them and put them on a little bit of a pedestal and say, here's some work that's worthy of attention. Watch Big Little Lies, see what they do with music, and see what you think. Watch Stranger Things and think about how that main title affects your experience of watching the show.
There's, the top 10 people making top 10 money, but then there's a lot of other people not making a lot of money. But it's really love of the game. Like, you do it sometimes for just love of the game, or you have a relationship with a director or producer, and they don't have a lot of money, and you're like, yeah, well, I got to help you out. That's just part of the thing.
I had several meetings with several TV supervisors, and we realized that the top 5 of us are all barely breaking even.
Which is insane.
I mean, it's insane, and we're doing a lot of projects, and we're barely breaking even. And that's like all of us collectively.
And what do you attribute that to?
Fees. The fees are, well, there's 2 major things. Number 1, the fees are totally inappropriate. 2, the schedules are unending, which means, yes.
Fees for what?
Fees for the job. You get paid per episode. So if you get hired on a project, if you're doing a network show and you've got, how many episodes are in network now? 26 or something like that?
Not anymore, no.
Yeah, but let's say back in the day it was 26 episodes. Yeah. You could be like, okay, 26 episodes at a certain number. You could then sketch out your year and say, okay, at least for this window from November through May, I've got this much money coming in, which means I can take a month off in the summer. Now you're dealing with a 10 episode cycle. The fees haven't changed or they've gotten lower. So now and the job has gotten harder because everybody is weighing in and you have a really long calendar. So for Breaking Bad, it's over a year per season, which means that we're over a year from when I start. Exactly.
Going to post.
Like, I'm working right now on season 4 already, and we're gonna have a meeting very soon, and we just finished up, season 3. So the problem that you have is this overlap, and I'm still paid the same fee per episode. A music editor is paid a window of time.
Right, we talked about that. They get paid per hour. They're part of a union. Make sure you get your editing skills lined up, because then you start as a music editor, and then you can get to music supervisors, like Apatow's guy, yep, whose name is...
Manich is one of them.
I'm sorry. Yeah, Jonathan
Leahy,
who started as a music editor, I think.
I think so.
But, it's definitely a good skill to have the technical skills.
Absolutely. It's a different set of things. I mean, I think that the problem ends up being frequently that if you're a good music editor, it's hard to do both. Some do. But it's also like, there's a business model, too, that says one company delivers the score, delivers the music supervisor, has the catalog within their own realm, and has the music editing, and it's a one-stop shop, and does all the paperwork. And if you do all that, if you're transparent about it, it's like saying, all right, I'll come to your production, and I will do this all for you. And there's a number of people who do that, and it's a smart system. It doesn't work for everything. On television, you don't really have that option. You can't possibly deliver all that comfortably. Yes?
I'm trying to speak for the class, which I'm curious, you've said it a couple of times. The music editor and you, can you talk about how does that work? Are you in the same room together? Are you emailing each other?
We're largely digitally. It depends. Like, I think back in the day, certainly during the 6th Under days, we would be in the room with them, and and come in with CDs and try different things out, and then basically make selects. Later on, as we got more sophisticated with it, I would start putting Post-it notes on CDs and be like track 1, track 2. And at the time, I was also looking against pictures, so I'd be like, and I spend a lot of time against pictures. So by the time I'm delivering to a music editor, I've looked at it against picture. I know exactly where I'm starting. I know exactly where I'm getting out. And all I'm asking really is, can you compress this, or can you add an end to this, or can you help me to go out on the guitar solo so it feels a little bit more natural as we fade out of it. Some music editors, again, will be very creative about it, but now it's much more of a digital thing. Like, I'll basically spend all night going through the scenes, finding the strongest elements, and have maybe 10 choices, let's say. I'll upload to Dropbox, a link, and I'll have an email very detailed saying, we're starting these in here, starting these in here. This one has some time compression issues. It's an 8-minute song with a lot of beats. Here are the breaks in the song. At 2 minutes, there's a break. At 4 minutes, there's a break. At 5 minutes, there's a break. Those are all spots that you can interchangeably pull. Or I would say, let's do the first 30 seconds and then jump to a minute 20, then jump to 2:30, then jump to that.
Specific.
So that way, when they deliver it back to us, and they might even say, hey, here's the cut you requested. I found a better solution, and here's the other angle. So my thinking always is give them the information, but give them the option. If they're willing to put the extra effort in and do something new, and they find a better way of making it work, that's gold. Best idea always wins as far as I'm concerned. But then that email goes off to them, they cut it, they send it back to us, cut to picture.
Right, now it's all files going back and forth.
Exactly. So now we review it, and then we say, okay, with the team, what are the strongest ones? What really fits well? And then we research each one of those songs, information about the song. We do pre-clearances on most of them. So we're now reaching out to everybody to get all the clearances rolling. And then that all gets done into a very careful spreadsheet where we have all information sent off to the showrunner. So they say, okay, it's Simon and Garfunkel. It's from this album. The background of the song is this. Here's an interesting note lyrically that kind of touches on the picture. You give as much detail as people have bandwidth for. Sure. Some shows have no interest at all. They just want to look at the picture and say yes. Vince and Peter are really into details. So
right.
If I find something from Romania, they want to know what the language is. They want to know what the translation is. They want to know background about the information. So I'll be like, okay, he's a gypsy guitar player. He's missing 3 fingers. And, the song is in a Hungarian dialect. And it's really about 2 brothers and their sibling rivalry. But it's done with weird sexual changes. So one's a female, one's a male. Boom.
Deep supervision right there.
And then they'll look at it and they'll be like, that's a crazy fucking story. Doesn't work for the scene, but let's hear that one again.
Right. Questions? I've only heard 2 or 3. I need 7 more. Yes, Audrey.
Yeah, so I have a question about, in your experience, what, has there ever been a song that you identify as the most challenging to license for, a TV show that you worked on or a project that you worked on?
Oh my God.
Most challenging license.
You know what? It's a that's a little bit like you kind of forget about the really tough relationships in your life because they kind of disappear and you just sort of forget about them. We've had a lot of. One of the most heartbreaking ones actually was with Wixen Music, and it was Steely Dan, Speak of the Devil. We had a sequence where Walter White was singing along to the radio, and Vince and I had talked for a long time about what would Walter White sing in the car to. And we thought about the time period, and we realized the sweet spot for him was sort of mid to late 70s, and that he's a cerebral kind of guy, and he's a little noodly, and we thought, Steely Dan kind of fits that category really well. Like, they're very smart, they're a little sarcastic, they're a little cynical, it's technically complicated, it's also lyrically complicated, and we just found a song that we thought was perfect, and we were going to have, and Brian really loved the idea of singing it, so he was, I think it was Hey 19. And so we basically had Brian doing the recordings of it, and we did a lot of legwork on it. And then we reached out to try to clear it, and we didn't have a very good budget on Breaking Bad. We had a very small budget, and it was challenging.
Give us an example per...
We had $12,000 per episode.
Per episode?
Yep. And that was for the first 3 seasons, and I think we were up to 20 at this point, maybe.
And remember, that includes sync and master, so
Yep.
that's publishing and masters for both.
Yep. And Wixen would not budge.
What was their number? What did they want?
It was crazy. I forgot what it was, but it was totally out of the world. In fact, the problem was that we didn't have anyone to reach out to. The way they structure their system, they don't have a person that you deal with. They have a person that represents that catalog. So it's very unservice friendly. Also, if you want to email them, you have this crazy little thing that you got to put in the email.
Have the code. Right?
Crawfish. So of course I didn't do that the first time, so they never got the email. So then I would call and leave voicemail messages, and it was like nobody would call me back. And then I ended up just stalking them, and I got really bitter about the whole thing. And I said, look, this is really important, and the time is running around because we're shooting on camera. So, and I knew how important this was to Vince, and they would not budge, and they just were not interested. And we didn't know who, we didn't know why, we didn't know whether it was Fagan and Becker had kind of denied it. We didn't know whether it never got to them.
Right.
Nobody communicated with us. And I was so bitter about the whole thing in the end that finally I just said, you know what, I think we got to dump this. It's not going to happen. So we ended up pitching America's Horse with No Name, which we thought was a very funny song because it's kind of a stupid song, and the lyrics are kind of ridiculous. And in a way, we just took a different angle. It's got a vibe to it. It's a weird song. And we just thought, it's kind of one of those one-hit wonders that you kind of remember. They're not really a one-hit wonder, but you get the idea. And it worked really well, and Brian did a great job with it, and he got peppered sprayed in the face, and it was fun, and the whole thing was great. I ended up speaking about that on a panel, and basically just very bitterly said that Wixen Music was completely unhelpful and didn't communicate well at all with us, and clearly don't have a whole lot of interest in artistic integrity and are really just interested in money. I don't think I said it that way because that would be libel.
What came back to you?
A cease and desist letter saying that I was going to be taken into court for libel
Come on.
from a lawyer. And the lawyer basically said,
That's crazy.
and the only reason it happened was because some trashy British magazine had written a quote, music supervisor disses Wixen Music, and they had some Google search that found the damn thing. And I literally got a very aggressive letter from a lawyer saying I was going to be sued for libel.
Wow.
And that I had to remove the video and I had to blah, 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 blah. I talked to my attorney and he said, just ignore them. It's an intimidation technique. And
But
I ended up...
it does bring up the thing that when you speak in public, you have to really be careful with your words because you just never know.
You never know.
I agree sometimes that organization is not as user friendly as it needs to be, and my first experience with them was a terrible one.
Mm-hmm.
And then once I got to know the right people, it got better.
Right.
Like anything else. But
We had actually a great solution. After that whole thing went down, Randall sent over this letter saying, let's put our swords down and let's talk. So I'm always happy to make peace with whomever. Like, I'll be honest, but I'll do peace with you if you want to come to the table. So I went up to Calabasas, which was like a 5-hour drive, and basically sat down and met with he and his wife, and they were really lovely people.
Yeah.
And they explained some very important stuff to me. Number one, they're an administrator, not a publisher, which means that they've got nothing economically at stake with whether a clearance goes through or doesn't go through. So really, they're not in a spot where they're going to fight their own client.
Meaning publishers maybe make a 50% piece of the song because they've written a check to the copyright holder. Whereas if you're an administrator, 10 to 15% is the most you're ever going to get out of that placement.
Yep. And they have a lot of very difficult clients who felt that they've been ripped off in the past. So
Neil Young,
exactly,
big
Tom
one,
Petty,
Tom Petty. They got big ones.
and they're folks who are like not very flexible, and in a way they cultivate that relationship, and they're very good at chasing residuals. So what they're really good at is finding every rock where there's some extra money for that artist. So licensing is not really their business model.
Yeah, it wasn't until I did the producer Janis Joplin movie that they own a bunch of the copyrights that my relationship got better because I was in business with them.
Exactly. And so what ended up happening was, I understood that the problem with Wixen is in German it means masturbate, which means that wherever they would have emails sent to them, they would get all sorts of porn emails. So that crayfish
is
thing
that
I
why
mentioned,
that is? See,
the
I'm
crayfish
learning
thing
I'm
was
learning from this guy.
the crayfish thing was specifically so they would avoid getting porn sites
I have
sent
no
to
idea
them.
why they did that. Thank you for that. All right,
Yeah.
more questions. We got to wrap it up soon, but I need questions. Hands in the air. Go. Yes, in the back.
My question is, it's more like an experience. So, when you have like a big time artist or big time label that you really don't have the budget for, is there any incentive that you can offer them, or do you use your personal experiences with them to like kind of smooth that over, or do you just stay away from like big?
No, it's a good question.
It's a good question. Everybody's a little bit different, I tend to play nice guy. I don't play hardball very well, so I kind of tend not to. I always feel like the artistic integrity of the stuff that I do is really the draw. So I try as much as I can to present that and to express my passion for how something works. I'll be honest, if like a director is asking for a song, I think it's a really shitty idea, and they come back with a really expensive quote, I may not fight so hard to reduce that quote. I may just simply be like, all right, they want a lot of money, we can't really afford it, let's look for other options. Sometimes there's no flexibility, and they say we really need that. So now you got to go back in there and really kind of battle it down. But honestly, the truth is, I don't promise things I can't deliver. So I don't say, hey, I'll make it up to you somewhere else, because I don't know that I will or that I can. That said, if somebody gives me a break, like if I go to someone and say, hey, I need a reduction, I will actively try to repay that favor. So I'll look through the catalog, I'll look for other opportunities. I don't make a big deal out of it, but they may get a license request at some other point. Whether it goes through or not is a whole separate issue altogether. But the best effort really is to recognize when people are being flexible with you. So the truth is everyone's a little different.
Yeah, and I'll also say that I've had times where the publisher or label wouldn't play ball. And if I really had a conviction or the director was like really wanted that piece of music, I will go around them and I will go to the rights holder or the artist. I'll find their artist, or if I have a relationship with the manager, and I'll start with the manager if I have a relationship with them, because sometimes they don't even get the clearance from the publisher. The publisher's not enough money. Next.
Right. Yep.
And that's like not a good enough answer for me. And I had to literally call the head of Warner Chappell and say, hey, on this clearance that you just denied because there wasn't enough money, even though this is an amazing use, has your artist seen this clearance? And I called him on the spot, and he's like, I don't know. And I said, well, I'm going to send it to him. And that changed his tune, but you can't do that too often.
No, you gotta be
You have to
very
pick
careful.
your spots. You have to have a real conviction. You say, like, I found this song from the 80s. When was the last time it was licensed in a movie? It wasn't a hit song. Yes, the money's not great, but the use is fantastic. And I called him on it, and I basically called it a favor, if you will, because the director was that passionate about it. So that's part of what we do. Those relationships with not just the publishers and the labels, but also the managers or even the agents or the cousin, whatever it takes. Our job is to close deals and get it done and serve our masters, who are the directors and producers of the projects. All right, next question, because we're running out of time. Yes. Oh, Vincenzo, I'm sorry. I missed you. Go ahead, Vincenzo.
So I just kind of want to go back to the Emmys. I saw that you were nominated for a specific episode that you worked on. Who decides that it was that episode?
Great question.
Is it something to your knowledge that you were nominated for, or was it published back?
No, it's an excellent question. It's really tricky actually because, I think it was easier last season to put an episode of Better Call Saul up because there were a few more episodes that were very music intensive and important. For this season, I basically presented an episode that had only 2 pieces of music that I was responsible for. It was in many ways it was a very quiet episode
In the
except for
episode.
those in the episode. And
Who makes that decision?
I do.
What episode to go with?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So it was a choice that I made. Now,
And why that one?
I chose that one because they were 2 very important sequences for the characters. One of them was the character Kim, and it was a huge moment for her and a turning point for her, and one really important moment for Saul. And whereas I think in the previous season it would have been a lot easier to make a choice, and I would have been able to be like, here did this, and this, and it was like music was a huge part of storytelling of that episode. This had only 2 moments, but those moments were incredibly important for story. And I felt like it made more sense for me to present something very confidently with very little specificity about like only 2 moments than it was to have another episode that had more music in it, but that was less consequential.
It didn't pack the punch.
Didn't pack the punch.
All right, Mr. Navarro in the back.
My question is in regards to, you guys said you were interested in writing and directing. If you were to direct your own film or television show, would you still hire someone to supervise the music, or would you do it yourself?
Oh God, absolutely. In fact, that would be the greatest joy. The greatest joy would be to take somebody who knows a lot, especially stuff I don't know, and kind of
Collaborate with.
Yeah, collaborate with. I would love that because honestly, I think it's a fantastic question. One of the problems that we have in many ways is that we dive so deep into things and we're so emotionally attached to those ideas that, and at the same time, we're also collaborators, and it's our job to facilitate, people's visions. That it would be very exciting to have a very music-intensive project, and God knows if I were to write something and develop it, it would probably be very music-intensive. But I would really enjoy having someone else's take on it. I think that would be really fun. That'd be a joy.
And for me, I am directing my first film as documentary, but it doesn't have a lot of money, so there is no real money for even music at this point, let alone a music supervisor. So because it is what I love doing, and it's part of my fabric, that I'm going to keep doing it. But if I did have money, it would be a pleasure to do that, to hire somebody to collaborate with. All right, who hasn't asked a question? Yes, Rachel.
Can you talk about your synchronized research project?
Ah, someone did some research.
Oh, she's a research, but she was my intern last summer, so she.
I'm impressed.
Yes, that's Thomas's one of his loves.
One of my babies.
Talk
yeah.
about it, yeah.
All right, so several years ago, remember I told you that whole window when I was not getting hired to do anything and was getting very frustrated? I decided, because I wrote all these letters to all these filmmakers and unfortunately sent them all to like the agents who I'm sure just found a trash can to throw them into. So I wrote to literally all my favorite directors and just said, I just finished up 6 Feet Under. I'm really excited about this. I want to work with you. I'd love to have a chance to just discuss what you're up to, simply put some music together for you and start a dialogue. Nobody responded.
How many did you send out?
20 at least.
Wow.
Nobody responded.
Hollywood.
Yeah, Hollywood. So I said, fuck those guys. I'm just going to music supervise the films that I want to do. So I started to, and actually I'm kind of lying because I think I did this earlier than that window because I started a long time ago. But I decided that I would take films that I love, that I thought had very iconic and really compelling uses of music, and try to reinterpret them as if they were done in the contemporary day. So if I was hired now to do a film made in 1968, how would I approach it? And the idea was it was an art project, so I would basically sit at home and go through the sequences and try to find things that I thought worked well. And then I would do it live as an experiment because I was breaking copyright law, number one. I would show it in a theater where I wasn't asking for permission. And I was a DJ at KCRW, so I was reasonably good with like 2 turntables, 2 CD players, and a screen. I would run the audio from the DVD into a mixer, and I would plot out exactly where the songs came in and out. Not just the time code, which I could barely see, but what visual cue. So when he takes his hat off, I know I got about 2 seconds to trigger the song, to bring the volume down on the DVD, to play the track that would play that moment. And if I did it well, you would never know that the music was changed. And the best compliments I ever got was, I don't know what you did to that movie. So my hope
So you changed
always
out
was,
people's music.
changed out the music all the way through, score and songs, the whole thing.
Wow.
And I put a lot more music into it. So it's figuring out the fabric of it. It did 2 things that were great for me. Number one, it made me study the best filmmakers, the ones that spoke the most to me. Hal Ashby, Mike Nichols, Stanley Kubrick, Darren Aronofsky, like people who did really beautiful, exciting work, study how they used music and what the music effect was, and then try to see what other angle could I do. So like I did Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, and I realized it's a musical.
The original?
The original. And I didn't know how I could do this, so I basically found instrumental hip-hop beats, a lot of like Jay Dilla stuff and like Wu-Tang Clan stuff. I'd find all these 12 inches that would have like a beat on it only, and I would just basically mix those beats underneath. And then later on, I started to get to know programs like Ableton, so I was able to make little extensions. So I did Taxi Driver with a contemporary jazz score. So instead of doing the Bernard Herrmann score, I took all these modern jazz bands, like Cinematic Orchestra I mentioned earlier, or a lot of experimental bands on Ninja Tune, and I would find ways of chopping these pieces up to add a new flavor to it to change the way the film felt. It was just a fun thing. For Harold and Maude, I got a chance to play. I just gotten in advance of the Arcade Fire first album, Funeral, and I'd gotten Neighborhoods, and it was one of those incredible songs. And I didn't have any project I could place it in because I didn't know this; they didn't actually license yet. I hadn't started 6 Feet Under yet, actually, so this was earlier than that. And basically, I ended up placing it in that scene, and I'd say 10 people who were in that room came up to me and said the first time I ever heard the Arcade Fire was in Harold and Maude, in the scene when he's driving up to find his girl in Santa Barbara. And to me, like, that's a wonderful way of being able to present something that you love.
You get the placements that the ones you always wanted to get in, you're actually putting them in something.
And then I got a
Phenomenal.
legal cease and desist
There you
letter
go,
from
another
Fox.
cease and desist.
Yep, Fox sent over, I was doing The Thin Red Line, the amazing
Terrence
movie by
Malick?
Terrence Malick. And someone sent the flyer to Fox's legal affairs, and I got a letter and I got a phone call.
Oh, that's awesome.
And someone threatened the job that I had at the time too. So
Wow.
yeah, it was hardcore.
He's a renegade. The kid's a renegade. All right, Mr. Dufo in the back, last question.
Yeah, you spoke about how you asked his team to send music over. I want to know how you determine when a scene needs commercially available music that's already there, or music from a composer or music from an artist that hasn't been released yet.
It's a great question. A lot of it is time, a lot of it is budget. For The Walking Dead, we knew that we had a soundtrack album companion piece, so we were given the mission of finding those moments, building those moments, and setting them up. It was tight. Like the turnaround time was frequently 2 weeks. Probably was the narrowest window that we had on that. On certain shows, like it's so fast that we can't even do it because it's a week mix. Like we spot it on Wednesday, and the next Tuesday we're mixing. So it's very hard to get a song built and delivered to you in time. Now it's easier because I think there's a lot more people who are able to turn around quickly, but it's tricky. So as far as that goes, it's timing and budget. And then also you're taking a risk. Like if I have a kill fee attached to a song, meaning a payment to the artist if we don't use the song, that means that I have to have in my budget able to not only license the song we will use, but pay the people for the songs that we don't use. And that's a tricky thing. I love building songs for shows, and it's always a great pleasure to build those things. But they're rare, and there's always the risk. And I have a meeting actually coming up on a new TV series, and I'm going to basically suggest to them that we use exclusively built music, and that's a huge
Define
danger.
built music for me.
In other words, we're going to be none of the music will have ever been heard before. We're not doing covers.
Create music for a picture.
All created new.
And what's your time frame to be able to do that?
I don't know. We got to figure out if we can pull it off. It's like a week turnaround time, maybe 2 weeks.
Right.
It's going to be hard. So
Yes, I was telling them we created 31 brand new songs for this Reality High Netflix movie, but we had 3 months to do it.
right.
So it seemed like it was that pacing, but it's not like deadline Monday, deadline Monday, deadline Monday.
That's probably what
That's
we're
a
dealing
tough one.
with, and it's tough. And the risk.
Great
really
idea.
is- Great idea. The risk is that if you blow it, or if they don't like what's there, what's your backup option? You spent your budget, and you don't have.
Well, if
extra
you
money.
have a series of go-to guys, I told them the concept of go-to guys
Sure.
that are in the headspace of where you are and they're ready to work. And if one is booked on something, the other guy's ready to go. That's the only kind of way to do it. That you have to have
Yeah.
like your Dave Porter standing by to be able to crush.
Yep.
Otherwise,
And
that's a
and
tough
you got to be able to like have 3 or 4 people willing to work on spec and hope that one of those ideas works and that it might fit elsewhere. So
Right.
there are ways of doing it. It's totally risky, and you got to read the politics too. If you've got 6 producers and one of the stars is a producer and everybody has their own and the show is a hit already, then you're really asking for trouble because
Sure.
everybody wants to weigh in on that. And if you're giving them 3 options and that's it, and you got no budget for anything else, you can be out of luck really easily. And then,
Right.
you lose the gig and you end up delivering nothing. And you don't want to take a great show and make it bad because you had too risky an idea.
So sometimes too clever ideas could make your life miserable. But
Absolutely.
anyway, we want to thank Thomas
Thank Eddie.
and Eddie, his little dog too. Goodbye, Eddie. Say goodbye. And I appreciate you guys all being in there asking questions. That's what we love doing. And next week we will find out what we're going to do now that Mitchell got stuck in a hurricane and got battered big time
wow.
in St. Martin, so he's not coming. So anyway, thank you guys, and we'll
It's a pleasure.
talk to you this week by email.